William Justice Goebel, January 4, 1856, February 3, 1900, was an American politician who served as the 34th governor of Kentucky for 4 days in 1900 after having been mortally wounded by an assassin the day before he was sworn in, though he was on his deathbed by that time. Goebel remains the only state governor in the United States to be assassinated while in office. A skilled politician, Goebel was well able to broker deals with fellow lawmakers, and equally able and willing to break the deals if a better deal came along. His tendency to use the state's political machinery to advance his personal agenda earned him the nicknames Boss Bill, the Kenton King, Kenton Czar, King William I, and William the Conqueror. Goebel's abrasive personality made him many political enemies, but his championing of populist causes, like railroad regulation, also won him many allies and supporters. This conflict of opinions came to a head in the Kentucky gubernatorial election of 1899. Goebel, a Democrat, divided his party with self-serving political tactics at a time when Kentucky Republicans were gaining strength, having elected the party's first governor 4 years previously. These dynamics led to a close contest between Goebel and William S. Taylor. In the politically chaotic climate that resulted, Goebel was assassinated. Everyone charged in connection with the murder was either acquitted or eventually pardoned, and the identity of his assassin remains unknown. Early life. Wilhelm Justice Goebel was born January 4, 1856, in Albany Township, Bradford County, Pennsylvania, a son of Wilhelm and Augusta Groenkel Goebel, immigrants from Hanover, Germany. The first of 4 children, he was born 2 months premature and weighed less than 3 pounds. His father served as a private in Company B, 82nd Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment during the American Civil War, and Goebel's mother raised her children alone, teaching them much about their German heritage. Wilhelm spoke only German until the age of 6, but he embraced the culture of his birth country as well, adopting the English spelling of his given name. Discharged from the army in 1863, Goebel's father moved his family to Covington, Kentucky. William attended school in Covington and was then apprenticed to a jeweler in Cincinnati, Ohio. After a brief time at Hollingsworth Business College, he became an apprentice in the law firm of John W. Stevenson, who had served as governor of Kentucky from 1871 to 1877. Goebel eventually became Stevenson's partner and executor of his estate. Goebel graduated from Cincinnati Law School in 1877. Then enrolled at Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio, but withdrew to support his family on the death of his father. Goebel was in private practice for several years, before partnering with Kentucky State Representative John G. Carlisle for 5 years. He then rejoined Stevenson and Covington as a partner. Personal characteristics. Goebel was never known as a particularly genial person in public. He belonged to few social organizations, and greeted none but his closest friends with a smile or handshake. He was rarely linked romantically with a woman, and is the only governor of Kentucky who never married. His physical features bespoke his taciturn nature. Journalist Irvin S. Cobb remarked that Goebel's appearance was reptilian, while others commented on his contemptuous lips, sharp nose, and humorless eyes. Neither was Goebel a gifted public speaker, eschewing flowery imagery and relying on his deep, powerful voice and forceful delivery to drive home his points. While lacking in the social qualities common to politicians, one characteristic served Goebel well in the political arena: his intellect. Goebel was well-read, and supporters and opponents both conceded that his mental prowess was impressive. Cobb concluded that he had never been more impressed with a man's intellect than he had been with Goebel's. Political career. In 1887, James W. Bryan vacated his seat in the Kentucky Senate to pursue the office of lieutenant governor. Goebel decided to seek election to the vacant seat representing the Covington area. His platform of railroad regulation and championing labor causes, combined with the influence of Stevenson, his former partner, should have given Goebel an easy victory, but this was not to be. A third political party, the Union Labour Party, had risen to power in the area with a platform similar to Goebel's. However, while Goebel had to stick close to his allies in the Democratic Party, the Union Labour Party courted the votes of both Democrats and Republicans, and made the election close, decided in Goebel's favor by a mere 56 votes. With only the 2 years remaining in former Senator Bryan's term to distinguish himself before re-election bid, Goebel took aim at a large and popular target, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. A proposal from pro-railroad legislators in the Kentucky House of Representatives to abolish Kentucky's Railroad Commission was passed and sent to the Senate. Cassius M. Clay responded by proposing the committee to investigate lobbying by the railroad industry. Goebel served on the committee, which uncovered significant violations by the railroad lobby. Goebel also helped defeat the bill to abolish the Railroad Commission in the Senate. These actions made him a hero in his district. He ran for a full term as senator unopposed in 1889, and won another term in 1893 by a 3-to-1 margin over his Republican opponent. In 1890, Goebel was a delegate to Kentucky's Fourth Constitutional Convention, which produced the current Kentucky Constitution. Despite the high honor of being chosen as a delegate, Goebel showed little interest in participating in the process of creating a new constitution. The convention was in session for 250 days, but Goebel was present for only 100 of them. However, he did secure the inclusion of the Railroad Commission in the new constitution. As a constitutional entity, the commission could only be abolished by an amendment ratified by a popular vote. This effectively protected the commission from ever being unilaterally dismantled by the General Assembly. Duel with John Sanford. In 1895, Goebel engaged in what many observers considered to be a duel with John Lawrence Sanford. Sanford, a former Confederate General Staff officer turned banker, had clashed with Goebel before. Goebel's successful campaign to remove tolls from some of Kentucky's turnpikes cost Sanford a large amount of money. Many believed that Sanford had blocked Goebel's appointment to the Kentucky Court of Appeals, then the state's highest, in retaliation. Incensed, Goebel had written an article in a local newspaper referring to Sanford as "Gonorrhea John." The climax came when Goebel and two acquaintances went to Covington to cash a check. Goebel suggested they avoid Sanford's bank, but Sanford, standing outside the bank, spoke to the men before they could cross the street to a different bank. Sanford greeted Goebel's friends, offering them his left hand. However, Goebel noticed that Sanford's right hand was on a pistol concealed in his pocket. Having come armed himself, Goebel clutched the revolver in his own pocket. Sanford confronted Goebel and said, "I understand that you assume authorship of that article." "I do," replied Goebel. According to witnesses, both men then drew their pistols, but no one was sure which had fired first. Sanford's bullet passed through Goebel's coat and ripped his trousers, but left him uninjured. Goebel's own shot fatally struck Sanford in the head. He died 5 hours later. Goebel pleaded self-defense and was acquitted, but the shooting haunted the rest of his political career. The acquittal was significant because the Kentucky Constitution prohibited dueling. If Goebel had been convicted of dueling, he would have been ineligible to hold any public office. Goebel election law. Kentucky Democrats, who controlled the General Assembly, believed that county election commissioners had been unjust in selecting local election officials, and which had unfairly contributed to the election of Republican Governor William O. Bradley in 1895 and Republican President William McKinley in 1896. Goebel proposed a bill, known as the Goebel election law, which passed along strict party lines and over Governor Bradley's veto, created a 3-member state election commission, appointed by the General Assembly, to choose the county election commissioners. Unfortunately, this system proved just as abusable as the one it replaced, since it allowed the Democrat-controlled General Assembly to appoint only Democrats to the election commission. Many voters decried the bill as a self-serving attempt by Goebel to increase his political power. and the election board remained a controversial issue until its abolition in a special session of the legislature in 1900. Despite rising to the office of President pro tempore in 1896, Goebel became the subject of much opposition from constituencies of both parties in Kentucky after the passage of the law. Gubernatorial election of 1899. Three men sought the Democratic nomination for governor at the 1899 party convention in Louisville: Goebel, Watt Hardin, and William J. Stone. When Hardin appeared to be the front-runner for the nomination, Stone and Goebel agreed to work together against him. Stone's supporters would back whomever Goebel picked to preside over the convention. In exchange, half the delegates from Louisville, who were pledged to Goebel, would vote to nominate Stone for governor. Goebel would then drop out of the race, but would name many of the other officials on the ticket. As word of the plan spread, Hardin dropped out of the race, believing he would be beaten by the Stone-Goebel alliance. Goebel took a calculated risk by breaking the agreement once his choice was installed as presiding officer. Hardin, seeing that Stone had been betrayed and hoping he might now be able to secure the nomination, re-entered the contest. Several chaotic ballots resulted in no clear majority for anyone, and Goebel's hand-picked chairman announced the man with the lowest vote total in the next canvass would be dropped. It turned out to be Stone. This put Stone's backers in a difficult position. They were forced to choose between Hardin, who was seen as a pawn of the railroads, or Goebel, who had turned against their man. Enough of them sided with Goebel to give him the nomination. Goebel's tactics, while not illegal, were unpopular and divided the party. A disgruntled faction calling themselves the Honest Election Democrats held two separate conventions in Lexington and nominated John Y. Brown for governor. Republican William S. Taylor defeated both Democratic candidates in the general election, but his margin over Goebel was only 2,383 votes. Democrats in the General Assembly began making accusations of voting irregularities in some counties, but in a surprise decision, the Board of Elections created by the Goebel election law and manned by three hand-picked Goebel Democrats, ruled 2-1 that the disputed ballots should count, saying the law gave them no legal power to reverse the official county results and that under the Kentucky Constitution the power to review the election lay in the General Assembly. The Assembly then invalidated enough Republican ballots to give the election to Goebel. The Assembly's Republican minority was incensed, as were voters in traditionally Republican districts. For several days, the state hovered on the brink of a possible civil war. Assassination and aftermath. While the election results remained in dispute, Goebel, despite being warned of a rumored assassination plot against him, walked flanked by two bodyguards to the old state capitol on the morning of January 30, 1900. Reports conflict about what happened, but some 5 or 6 shots were fired from the nearby state building, one striking Goebel in the chest and wounding him seriously. Taylor, serving as governor pending a final decision on the election, called out the militia and ordered the General Assembly into a special session, not in Frankfort, but in London, Kentucky, a Republican area. The Republican minority obeyed the call and went to London. Democrats resisted the move, many going instead to Louisville. Both groups claimed authority, but the Republicans were too few to muster a quorum. The day after being shot, the dying Goebel was sworn in as governor. In his only act, Goebel signed a proclamation to dissolve the militia called up by Taylor, which was ignored by the militia's Republican commander. Despite the care of 18 physicians, Goebel died the afternoon of February 3, 1900. Journalists recalled his last words as, "Tell my friends to be brave, fearless, and loyal to the common people." Skeptic Irvin S. Cobb uncovered another story from some in the room at the time. On having eaten his last meal, the governor supposedly remarked, "Doc, that was a damned bad oyster." In respect of Goebel's displeasure with the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, the governor's body was transported not by the L&N direct line, but circuitously from his hometown of Covington north across the Ohio River to Cincinnati. and then south to Frankfurt on the Queen and Crescent Railroad. His body lay in state in the Oddfellows Lodge. Resolution of the election. With Goebel dead, tensions began to ease. The idea of Goebel's lieutenant governor, J.C.W. Beckham, as governor was more palatable to much of the opposition than a civil war in the state, though many of them may have preferred war to a Goebel governorship. After a lengthy meeting, a bipartisan compromise was drafted which would have ended the matter. The terms called for Republican recognition of Goebel's rightful election, and Beckham's subsequent right to govern. Republicans would also remove the militia from Frankfurt. Democrats would, in turn, extend immunity to any Republican official found to have ties to the assassination, stop contesting elections for other state offices, and work to pass a nonpartisan election reform bill. The agreement needed only Taylor's signature to become effective. Unwilling to relinquish his office, Taylor balked. Compromise having been exhausted, both sides agreed to litigate the matter. The Kentucky Court of Appeals ruled that the General Assembly had acted legally in declaring Goebel the winner of the election. That decision was appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. Arguments were presented in the case, Taylor v. Beckham, on April 30, 1900, but on May 21, the justices decided 8-1 not to hear the case, allowing the Court of Appeals decision to stand. The lone dissenter was Associate Justice John Marshall Harlan, a Kentucky native and a member of the Republican Party. Trials and investigations. During the ensuing assassination investigation, suspicion naturally focused on deposed Governor Taylor, who fled to Indianapolis, Indiana under the looming threat of indictment. The governor of Indiana refused to extradite Taylor, and he was thus never questioned about his knowledge of the plot to kill Goebel. Taylor became a successful lawyer in Indiana, and was pardoned in 1909 by Beckham's successor, Republican Augustus E. Wilson. 16 people, including Taylor, were eventually indicted in the assassination of Governor Goebel. 3 accepted immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony. Only 5 ever went to trial, 2 of those being acquitted. Convictions were handed down against Taylor's Secretary of State Caleb Powers, Henry Utsi, and Jim Howard. The prosecution charged that Powers was the mastermind, having a political opponent killed so that his boss, Governor Taylor, could stay in office. Utsi was an alleged intermediary, and Howard, who was said to have been in Frankfurt to seek a pardon from Taylor for the killing of a man in a family feud, was accused of being the actual assassin. The trials were fraught with irregularities. All 3 judges were pro-Goebel Democrats, and at one point the juror pool of 368 people was found to have only 8 Republicans. Republican appeals courts overturned Powers and Howard's convictions, though Powers was tried 3 more times, resulting in 2 convictions and a hung jury, and Howard was tried and convicted twice more. Both men were pardoned in 1908 by Governor Augustus E. Wilson. Utsi, who received a life sentence, did not appeal, but after 2 years in prison, he turned state's evidence. In Howard's second trial, Utsi claimed that ex-Governor Taylor had discussed an assassination plot with Utsi and Howard. He backed the prosecution's claims that Taylor and Powers worked out the details. He acted as an intermediary, and Howard fired the shot. On cross-examination, the defense pointed out contradictions in the details of Utsi's story, but Howard was still convicted. Utsi was paroled in 1916 and was pardoned in 1919 by Democratic Governor James D. Black. Of those allegedly involved in the killing, Taylor died in 1928, Powers died in 1932, Utsi died in 1942. Most historians agree that the assassin of Governor Goebel will never be conclusively identified. Legacy. Goebel Avenue in Elkton, Kentucky and Goebel Park in Covington, Kentucky are named in honor of the late governor. See also History of Kentucky. List of assassinated American politicians. List of unsolved murders. References. Further reading. Cobb, Irvin S. 1941. Exit Laughing. The Bobbs-Merrill Company,